Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. This is our 119th show. Today's guest is Kevin Torf, author of Getting the Job Done. Kevin, welcome. And Kevin's in Hawaii. I wish I was there with you.
Oh, Mark, I should thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show. I'm on the big island, and yes, I leave today actually. So a little disappointed, but I had a great week.
I would be disappointed too. I'm sure you want to buy real estate there. Everybody I know who goes there wants to buy a condo or something so they can keep going back. So Kevin, talk about your professional background before we talk about the book.
Yeah, I consider myself a technology executive, if there's such a term or word. And I started off on the engineering side. My father taught me electronics at a young age. That I was fortunate enough to do this when I was some 15 years old. So most of my life I've been doing development, both hardware and software. And over the years, as I started changing jobs and building my own companies, I started moving over to management, and today manage a technology company.
Great. And why did you write this book?
It was a challenge for me. It started like that anyway. I was never a great scholar or a writer. I've always got by, and but I always had lots of ideas. I loved philosophically trying to debate best ways of doing things and looking for different processes. And, I wanted to document some of these different styles that I had adapted in managing large projects. And the book took several several iterations, and I wouldn't say generations, several iterations before, I felt the book started representing my thoughts. And, but it's a compilation of the way I've done things, the way I behave, the way the company runs over the years. And yes, it's come together.
Did you run the writing of this book like a project, and did you meet all the timelines you and the publisher set? And what did you learn from this process?
Well, I think I'll go with the saying, do as I say, not as I do. So no, I would love to say yes to you, Mark. Yeah, it was well articulated and well detailed. But then at the same time, for those that do read the book, you'll find the books are all about really just getting started and adapting. And the book evolved that same way. I started writing out these thoughts that I had on single pages, and my intent was that there was going to just be one tip per page. So maybe that was planned, and I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want this to be a heavy academic book. And first I started looking to really try find a way for people to relate to it. And that's where I came up with looking at a historic event, taking something historic over time, comparing it to an action today. And that evolved as the book was being written. And then, when I had quite a large compilation of all these different tips, I thought, well, now I need to sort it out and put it into some organized layout. And it just happened, it wasn't planned actually, that by using the word projects, which I turned into an acronym, it was a good way to sort out the different tips into these different categories, and it evolved. And so I wouldn't say it was planned like that way from the beginning, but it evolved and it adapted.
Can you tell them the acronym?
Yeah, so projects is the word project was fortunate enough played well into the different areas of planning, which is obviously what you always need to do for projects, for reflection, which I talk about a lot because it's looking at how you're performing and how you're doing against your plan, organizing. Everything in life, I do believe, needs structure, and projects definitely do need their own. There's a structure in that form, and there's different ways to do that. Juggling, because we always seem to be caught between doing multiple things when we have an intention or a goal. Uh, empowerment, because a lot of the book is focused around working in a team and how to bring that team together, and the teamwork itself, coordinating activities with the team, and standards, on how to really build disciplines and make things more consistent and repetitive. So yes, it really worked out well.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a must read for anybody who's taking on any kind of large venture, because I think it really helps them break it down into digestible parts in order for them to be able to execute smartly. So, what are the skills needed to be a great project manager?
I think if I had to, when I heard you're going to ask this question, I try to think of just one word that really could answer it. And I think to be a leader is the simple answer of the new project manager today. It never was like this. Even myself personally, I always was very controlling. I always wanted to make sure I micromanaged everybody. I told people what to do, how to do it, and even when to do it. Today's good project managers really have to lead people. They have to allow people to evolve and learn. And to allow people to learn, you got to let people really tell you how they want to do things and when they're going to get it done. So there's actually a tip in the book called push versus pull. And that's what I would emphasize a good leader is today. It's somebody that has that ability to lead and pull people along versus force and push people.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that during the course of this hour. You write having a good cross section of skills on the team is critical. What type of skills are needed?
It's every team's different, so it all depends what you're trying to do. A lot of the work that I work on is IT projects, technology projects, infrastructure, applications. But teams of there's teams working together doing construction. There's teams working in finance. I think the key here is to get different skill sets that are all going to be required to make up that team and allowing them all to work together. The example I use the best to try to describe a team, it's like the Montessori school system, where it's a system where they mix different age groups together. You have one grade with 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. And Montessori's intention was that people will learn from each other. So you'll have a person maybe not as experienced or not necessarily being a subject matter expert, learning from someone that is a subject matter expert. And you're both learning because the person, that's not as skilled will learn from the person that is more skilled. But skilled people learn from teaching other people as well. So it could be just skill levels. It could be learning, as I mentioned in my world where we're doing a lot of application development, you have someone that you need some help on the infrastructure side, you might need some help on the business side. And each person's got their domain, but working together and sharing some of that really helps the team evolve more collaboratively.
I find out when I used to coach tennis that I became a better tennis player from the coaching, because you start to really hone down on each part of your game as opposed to just playing the game. So I think, when you're a project manager, you tend to even get better because of, like you said, all the planning you do, and each piece of it requires different skill sets, and you start to improve your own skill set. Has project management changed since COVID with people wanting to work from home? Because especially in the 21 to 35-year-old segment, they don't really want to come back to an office. They're happy working from home or a Starbucks or wherever.
No, I think COVID has definitely impacted the way we work, uh, especially in team efforts where there's unity and camaraderie that really comes together when people engage with each other and get to know each other personally, even outside of the work that they're performing. Now, Does that mean we're not going to get back there to that level of engagement? I think we will. It takes effort from people. It takes adapting. I like to think about, when I compare how my father grew up to how I grew up. I think things are very different. We do things very differently. He wasn't any less or any more successful. I've just done it in a different way. Will my grandchildren do things differently going forward? Yes. Would COVID have impacted that? Definitely. But we've tried things. We have a company call, a video conference every Friday with anybody in the company that wants to join. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary, but we get 40, 50 people on the call, and we talk about anything anybody wants to talk about. So it's finding ways to adapt and change how we do things. But yes, no, COVID has definitely changed the way we work, and I do think we will evolve. And I think, some things will be good and some things maybe not so good, but that's in the eye of the beholder. It's a perspective.
For sure. Will creativity suffer? Because I can't imagine how you can be really creative as a group, as a team, without running into each other and going out for happy hour and having coffee together and just bullshitting.
No, it's like I mentioned, we're going to have to find different ways to adapt. That's that opportunity that we grew up with, and when we worked in a brick and mortar building, and we did more traveling, it was a different lifestyle, and I think that those days, or at least for the next 5, maybe 10 years, I don't believe are going to happen. Will it come back? Who knows? I don't have that crystal ball, but I do think we will adapt and we will change. We'll just find different ways of doing it. I look at, my grandchildren. I got 3 of them now. They playing with the iPhone, and they play and they know how to do things that, well, 7, 8 years old. I didn't even have an electronic device. Now, are they going to be better off for it or worse off for it? I don't know. We'll find out later on in life, but I just think it's different, and we won't do things the same way as we've done them.
Well, I think that's with every generation, right? There's just these enormous number of changes that we end up going through. And somehow we all make those adjustments. How do you deal with time zone differences?
It's some people do struggle, but I think it's also it's what you need. It's a mindset that you need to get the job done. I don't know, that's a pun there with the book, but it, I do what I have to do. Now, I work within my time zones. I work with a lot of people on the East Coast. They work within their time zones. But with that, we lose a lot of time between each other. So there's times where they might need to wake up earlier, or in their case, go to bed later. I'm on the West Coast, so I would have to wake up earlier, like I'm doing for this call today. But I don't think about it as a chore. I don't think about it as, oh, I got to get up early in the morning, and that's bad. It's like going to the gym. I'm trained to do what I have to do, and I will do what I need to do to get the job done. And I would call it just mental conditioning, especially if you're going to have people working across the United States. I compensate. I'll start early this morning and maybe end an hour or two earlier. But I adjust, and I'll do what I need to do.
Yeah, my daughter has a global marketing practice, and she lives in California. So she's 3 hours behind the East Coast. Now she's in Sweden. She's 6 hours ahead of the East Coast and 9 hours ahead of her West Coast clients. And it's tough, because of the kind of, in order to meet with your clients and meet deadlines or be part of group conversations, it's not an easy thing to go and do. How many employees do you have?
So I've got 3 companies. T2 Tech has got about 45 engineers, project managers, subject matter experts, and they all over the United States. And then we have T2 Flex, which has about 120 agents that help hospitals and providers schedule appointments, more of the complex appointments. And they also work remotely from home all over the country. So I think we operate in about 18 states today.
Wow, congratulations. And what have you learned as being an entrepreneur? I mean, that's never an easy job, but you've built quite a big company here. So what have you learned? And how did your project management skills allow you to be a better CEO?
Well, I learned, I didn't go through a formal education and get trained in project management or get trained in how to run a business. I think, today, if I had to redo schooling, I'd love to see more programs like that where people actually have to start a little business. I think with you, when you do your MBA, maybe that's the closest it becomes to the reality of opening up a bank account and going out and filing papers with the government or doing what you need to do to actually build these businesses. But I was fortunate that my talents allowed me to start getting into the consulting side of this business by giving people advice on how to do things. Technology, has evolved over the years, and I've always been fortunate to be one step ahead. And what happened, my project started getting larger and larger and larger, and I needed people to help me manage these projects. So I was fortunate enough to hire some people, and I needed to learn how to organize and coordinate activities between them. And I started just doing it naturally through reading and learning from, just like maybe some people listening today from this podcast that want to break into this field. But then I did start learning and studying. Probably did it in the latter part of my life versus the earlier part, like most people, and did my PMI and then did Agile Scrum training, and then I've taken little bits of all of these thoughts and different methodologies and brought them all together. So I would say it's been an interesting process. Again, not planned, adapted to change, and evolved with it. And today, I think we run a very solid methodology on how to get projects completed and get them done.
I think going and getting an MBA, it all depends on the school you go to, because many schools actually even discourage, in business schools, discourage the faculty from continuing to work in the corporate sector, which means they're kind of out of date on what they're teaching people. So
Yeah.
that's a big problem. You don't see that like at a Wharton school, because I taught at Wharton, but I see it at a lot of other schools where shockingly they discourage them from doing things in the private sector. So I think that's critical.
No, I agree. It's very much like I said, if just get them started. And but the first day of class, I'd say, all right, go down to City Hall and go register a business. Go to a bank and open up a bank account, and just slowly do it, and do it more in a practical form than a theoretical form. And I'd even do this when they're in high school. You don't need a college degree to learn how to do these things.
Now I teach entrepreneurship, and of course I live it. And I'm with working on a metaverse venture, and there's four of us, and five of us, and four of us are over 60, but one's 21, and we made him the CEO. And he said, in the 15 weeks we've been working on this, he said, I learned more in 15 weeks than I learned my entire 4 years of undergrad at Cornell.
Well, I did attend college. It's actually not true. I did, but I never completed it. I did my first year. And when people ask me what education do I have, I got the education of life. I learned by hard knocks and just doing things and making mistakes. Fortunate enough, adjusting accordingly. And today, as I said, we have 3 very successful businesses.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, you write about creating a benchmark for project development. How do you do that, and what does that look like?
I think it's always important to to have a benchmark. We need to measure our productivity, we need to measure our ability, we need to measure our success. In the book, I use quite a few tips regarding teams and how teams compete with each other, sports teams.
Right.
And, I'd like, you don't go to a game and not have any score. Actually, in Canada, the AYSO tried this over a period of time several years ago, where they didn't want to keep score. And they said, let the kids have fun. Now, at a young age, maybe there's some merit to that. But as you grow older, you don't know how well you're doing if you don't have a benchmark. And it doesn't matter what that benchmark is. You can start with anything. That benchmark could be an industry norm. It could be a benchmark of your own ability that you predefined. It could be a benchmark of your goal. But you have to find a way to measure against that benchmark, compare how you're doing against that benchmark. Otherwise, there's no basis for you to evolve and improve. So yeah, I do think it's very, very important. It's the same as having a diet. You need a goal, and the benchmark in business is critical.
Are there metrics that you must include and others that are pointless?
I think each project is slightly different, but one that is consistent, again, in my line of work, is scope. What am I going to be doing? What is it that I want to accomplish? You got to define what the goal is and what at the end of the project are you going to have achieved. We refer to that as scope. Schedule. There's a timeline. Is this something you want to do in 1 week, 6 months, 1 year? What is that timeline? And then, not most important, but very important, is budget. How many resources am I going to need? What's that going to cost me? So these are 3 constraints. I like to think of them 3 separate pillars, and they're consistently moving, because as projects evolve and as business changes, so, your scope changes. Well, if scope changes, that means now it might take you longer than what it did before, but something has to give. And you've got to keep these 3 constraints always in balance. And you got to, really try and work within them so that you can consistently achieve your objectives as you originally intended. Now, a lot of times, in today, especially, the world is changing so quick and so fast. Your scope that you originally have when you start a project isn't usually ultimately even what you want when you end it. So it's consistently working within these 3 constraints.
You write that too much documentation probably won't add value. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I think people sometimes document just for the sake of documenting. They don't look at the reason they document in. They do it more as just a normal course of action. I like to think of it, if I'm going to create a document, what am I going to use it for? Am I going to use it for somebody else to have knowledge about what I've done? Am I going to use it so somebody can maintain what I've done? Is it going to be a reference that I just need for someone to be aware of something? And I think we lose sight of really understanding how it's going to be implied. So what I do see happen quite often, people document something and they don't maintain it. And the implications of that are significant, because a document that's incorrect really can actually be detrimental to you later. So if you've documented one thing and after 2-3 years you don't maintain it, and then when it's needed, someone wants to use it as a reference, and now they're getting wrong information, I'd actually rather have no documentation, because then at least I know I have to go do the discovery, and I'll have to determine what the person originally intended. Now, again, it's not black and white. There's a balance. So I think the key here is, it's not that you don't want to document. Documents is very important. You just want to find and document what you can maintain and what is valuable and what is its purpose.
I would also think that there's a good and bad documentation. I think every client expects it, but also it can get you in a lot of trouble if you don't keep up with it, like you said, because now if something goes wrong, the lawyers will be eviscerating you once they take a look at your documentation and find out that you didn't keep it up. I mean, right? I mean, you got to be so careful about that.
And that's a good example. You brought up, well, I need to document this because there might be a legal consequence. And that type of documentation might be a lot more articulate, where you literally are taking minutes of meetings because you want it on record. This person said that. Again, that's the reason, in technology, if I'm doing a document on how I've designed software, I just need to be able to tell them the key items. If it's a building, architectural building, you have a plan because you had to know where your load bearing walls are. So everything's got a reason, but don't document if you don't have that reason or you don't see that it can be used in any value. Otherwise, it's so time consuming.
What's the best way to triage a project? You
You
even
know,
talk about what triage actually means. I think nobody even knows until, I didn't know. That's why I love reading these books.
Yeah, well, those are the antidotes in history. Back in our earlier Napoleon years when they needed to triage the efforts and how he went about doing his daily deeds. But I think it's taking a step back and looking at the critical path needed to achieve an objective. And that objective, is different for every different case. Some people, when you see some of these movies and you take MASH, they triage, they have all these patients coming in from the war zone, and which ones are more critically ill than the others, and let's get to them first. In business, it's different. In business, that prioritization could be something critical that has got lots of other dependencies, so you need to get it done first. It might not be important, but if you don't do it first, something later might suffer. So you need to analyze and look to understand that dependency. Sometimes you want to just triage some low-hanging fruit so you could get some momentum in the team and just get things done, so you can show people that you are moving forward and you are starting to accomplish things. I think a triage is about trying to do that and get a rough order of magnitude very quickly, what it is that's going to allow you to start your project. You don't want to spend hundreds and thousands of hours on this. You want to be able to really just do enough to get started, but try identify which are a critical way of going about doing that in order to be successful and get some of those more critical items done first.
Is that like a minimum viable project that entrepreneurs do when they get started on a new venture, that you don't want to do the full blown product, that you're offering just enough to be able to see if this makes sense?
Yes, and in that case, if you are doing software development, things again change so much over the years that, and even just in the time you start to the time you finish, you want to do you want to do some type of pilot, and that pilot might be a viability. It might be just to, if you've got a user interface, try get an idea of what that user interface is going to look like and how people will accept it and adapt to it. If it is, a tool that's calculating certain types of results, again, it doesn't have to be in a perfect format. It doesn't have to be completed. You want to do these in minimal incremental steps so that you can adapt and change. And it's just about starting and getting that first few initiatives of going, because that's what starts everybody thinking, and that's what starts everybody engaging more, and then it will evolve over that period.
You often read, especially with big projects, how companies go over budget. How do you reduce the chances of that happening? And I see it all the time. In fact, I never trust any of the, especially, I hate to say it, but the IT people, when they give you a number and how long it would take, I always double that number.
No, well, listen, it's a challenge. I'm not going to tell everybody on this call here today that I haven't ever been over budget. But it's a combination of things. There is no one thing that's going to, stop you from being over budget. It's understanding the scope, looking at the effort, anticipating what will go wrong. Murphy's law. It's a rule. There's a tip on it as well in the book. It's about knowing that things are going to go wrong, and trying to identify what ones possibly could. Uh, it's anticipating the fact that the project is going to change. Scope changes today in business are normal. The business changes. If you go look again in the book, how a lot of companies started, YouTube and a few others, they didn't end the way they started. That was never their intention. So they had an intention, and then as they evolved and they found their market, so their thinking changed. And that's an extreme example, but you've got to anticipate there's going to be changes. And then you have to do your retrospectives, which I talk about in the book as well, to really try and understand how similar projects that are related to what you're trying to do, how they evolved, and how long did they take. And you've got to try to do this without spending months and months in planning, just like we spoke of earlier. Get started, look at that rough order of magnitude. Yes, I don't disagree with your thought. Add a factor of contingencies in there, and make it a habit of just looking at these things very frequently and very often, uh, and trust in the methodology and the process. Will that always give you the perfect result? No, but it will give you a better result than what you're going to get doing it other ways.
Why is scoring important to team morale and effectiveness?
Well, we all like to win. So, it's a common nature. And, so if you set yourself a goal and you do that benchmark we discussed, you want to know that you've been successful. Humans need to be assured what they are doing. They are being recognized for it. They are being successful against it. And scoring is critical to understanding it. But scoring is also critical to help you estimate and plan, because if you know what your ability is, or your team's ability, or your team's capacity, and that's very critical, because a lot of these projects all relate to time. Budgets go out of whack because people take longer to do things than they need, or they need more resources. So understanding a team's capacity is very, very important to understand how you're scoring today against what you had anticipated, and then adjusting your plans so you can accommodate your future efforts. And this is that three constraints that come back into play here. But you've got to be able to look at this on a regular, frequent basis, and it does help morale. People like to see that they've been successful. They want the reward of knowing they've accomplished something.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. That incentivizes them and drives them forward. When breaking down tasks, you're looking at time involved, number of steps or items that can be reasonably accomplished. How do you do that where there's some accuracy to that? How many steps and so forth? How do you break those things down? What's your methodology for this?
Well, you start with your goal and your objective. You got to then break those down into, tasks, large tasks. Don't go down and get into the detail in the weeds straight away. Agile Scrum, one of the methodologies, call them epics. Break your project down into 6, 7 epics. So try and divide it out as much as you can. Then go look at those epics and, try break those epics down into what again Agile calls stories, but they really are tasks that you're going to be working within in each one of those epics. Prioritize it in such a way that you're not getting into the detail on epics that maybe is only going to happen in 6 months' time. When you get there, you can redefine it, but you do want to lay out what that might look like. You just don't want to do it in a lot of detail at that time. So once you've now got these epics, you've got these stories, you've prioritized them, and you're doing this at a very high level without getting down into the weeds. Now you want to take your first story, really, and now say, all right, let me get into the detail that I need to, and break that down much more into uh, simple tasks that you can do daily, you can even do by the hour, and build this out. And the smaller you make it, I have a saying that I don't know, maybe someone else, maybe I did hear it from somebody, or I believe I found it myself, but you will be less wrong. And why I say that you'll be less wrong is people are usually wrong when they have to estimate how long something's going to take them to get done, or how much it's going to cost. Uh, so you're going to be wrong more than likely anyway. So now, how do you become less wrong? And you do that by really simplifying and trying to estimate the effort on something as small as you possibly can. But you can't do that for the whole project. Otherwise, it will take you months or years before you get started. So you do this based on how you prioritized your workload.
That's why I liked all your sports analogies, because that's how successful teams win, is by simplifying everything and not getting it too complicated, and just throwing a few complications in there to shake up the competitor in a sense. So, and you talk a lot about that throughout the book. You write that team members should have input on the timeline and task. Any concerns some members are too cautious and other members are not cautious enough if you allow them to do this?
I would say yes and yes.
Uh-huh.
But the goal is to come to that consensus if possible. I mean, you know, that is what a team is about. A team is about everybody believing. But that's why it's very, very important to do those retrospectives, because when that team gets together and they say, all right, how did we score? How did we do? How did we go? How did we work against the benchmarks we set? Or what is the metrics that we're using? And we use all of those tools, people will start compromising, and people will start understanding, well, I didn't think we were going to do that 2 weeks ago, and yet we were able to do it. So that person now might be a little bit more, you know, uh, agreeable to do things that they might not have done before. Another person that is in a different state, who really wanted to change the whole world in 2 weeks, realized, well, that wasn't possible. And after 2 3 iterations of this, they start realizing that they are not being realistic about their ability or what they want to achieve. But you've got to bring all these tools together. And that's why the scoring and doing the benchmarks are critical, is to really allow people to come to that consensus and not let cautious people and not too cautious people impact the balance.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you're a consultant, how do you protect yourself against scope creep without pissing the client off?
So it's about being transparent from the outset. People don't want to tell people bad news, and they don't say anything. And then when the news is bad, that will piss people off, because they don't know, and they haven't been they've only been given this bad news. But if you're transparent from the outset and you report everything that's going on, so you can get a regular cadence with your client or your stakeholder, and tell them what you've done and what you're going to be doing on some regular structure, that information just becomes information. It's not good, it's not bad. It's how the project's evolving. Uh, and we use all the tools we spoke of. You'll build confidence in the stakeholder or your client, and they'll start trusting you. And then it's just information, and you're not waiting for a problem to become a problem. You just evolve in, and it's a very good practice. uh, and it's a way that you don't even put yourself in that predicament, because you've been transparent from the outset. I like to tell people, we do this often when we want to send emails to people. So we'd send an email to a group of people that, and we don't feel we're getting the job done, or we're not being successful, or the people reading our email aren't listening. So then we'll add some superior onto that email or a way to escalate it. And the rest of the team will get really, pissed off, as you rightfully said, because now you've shown them up. But if you had sent everybody those emails from the very beginning and from the outset, they wouldn't have been as offended when you then did it. So I believe it's really trying to create that transparency from the beginning.
Does one approach fit all cultures, and cultures, and my question relates to ethnic groups and countries, because how you might do a project in China might be different than how you might do it in France or the United States. And even the United States, we're so culturally diverse between the Northeast and the Southeast and the Midwest and so forth.
No, you do need to adapt. People get motivated in very different ways. You need to seek out what works and what doesn't. So you got to allow the team to interact and then determine what it is you need to do. It comes down to doing those retrospectives again, looking at your performance. But you're not just looking at the performance of the team. You're also looking at the performance of how the team engages with each other. What worked, what didn't work. Maybe you need more outings. Maybe every now and again a good party or getting together in a remote condition where you can come and unite. What's that culture going to get the most from or most out of? And practice those principles, because the principles don't change that much. The methodology isn't going to radically be different, but you can adapt to it to accommodate that team, and you want to get that better interaction. And it's about finding what that balance is that works without changing your whole methodology.
How do great team players be effective managers that don't feel the need to micromanage and reorganize? There are different ways and I recognize there are different ways to accomplish these tasks.
You have to empower people. You have to learn to trust people, but you have to do that by allowing them to learn. So if you consistently telling a person how to do something and by when, they're not going to learn. Because now you force something on them. When that person tells you how they're going to do it and how long they think it will take them, and even if they're wrong, they'll now learn from that. So you got to empower people and trust people to do that. And that's that concept with pushing or pulling. Don't tell someone you got 2 weeks to do something. Ask the person, how long do you think it will take you to do what you need? And let the person say, oh, it will take me 2 weeks. Now they've made themselves more accountable. You've empowered them. When they're wrong, they're going to feel more responsible. So it's very important to really empower and trust people to make their own mistakes for them to be able to learn.
How do you handle team members who thrive on chaos and do things last minute, but manage to produce a great result, even though it causes stress for the other members? I've worked with people like that.
It's hard because some of these people are very, very smart and they can be very valuable, but they are a cancer. I don't know if you've been fortunate enough to listen to Netflix's podcast on how their company grew, but he talks about the value of the team and the value of people, and he opts for in his podcast, and I agree with it, that the culture that you're building and the camaraderie of people wanting to help each other are far, far, far greater and more important than a single individual's experience or skills. And you're better off without that person. So I know it's the hardest thing to do. I still struggle with it today. But you don't want people like that on your team. There is no team in that person, regardless how good they are.
Yeah, I think that it can be very destructive to the team, and you lose really good people. One is collecting too much information for a project a bad thing? You mentioned this in the Oxford Dictionary example.
Yeah, well, in the Oxford Dictionary, you need to everything needed to be articulated, and every word needed to be understood and refined. And he actually went about it in a very a collaborative way. He allowed anybody in the world to send him their version of what word they felt should be part of it, and he collected, I forget the exact number, but millions and millions of slips of paper.
Right.
That's the
5
whole, that
million.
yeah, something like that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
that's a good example of you needing that. You need that information in order to be able to fulfill the purpose of the Oxford Dictionary. It's a reference for every word in the English language for you to understand. It comes down to, what do you need it for again? Decide how and what you want. And we're not building we don't have to do a Oxford Dictionary every day. It took him years and years. So again, just document what is needed.
How do you get people to step outside their comfort zone to improve their skills?
You know, Keeping the team aligned with a single objective and having everybody contribute will help. If a team member, we've done some studies and it's quite interesting. A team member would be more obligated and feel more accountable and responsible to another team member than to their boss or their superior or their project manager. So if you can allow the team to feel that if one of the team members needs help, the rest of the team's going to help them. So they really won't fail because they fail as a team, not as an individual. And you can build that unity. You'll find people will do things then as long as the team comes to an agreement and is in consensus and comes to a consensus that, oh, let this person go try that. And knowing full well that the team will be there behind that person. If you can create that chemistry, you can do things that are so much greater than your ideas or your thoughts. Again, in the book, I talk about some sports teams where they didn't have a single superstar on them and how they were able to win championships and leagues. And they did it by trusting each other and helping each other. And they then achieve things that people don't normally achieve, or you generally have not done it in a way where they've paid millions of dollars for superstars.
A question from the audience. Do you recommend having a brainstorming session when doing a SWOT analysis? And which element do you think is underrated for strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats?
Yes, again, there's time for everything. You got to look to see what it is you're looking to do. Uh, when you set up your cadence of meetings and you start with your objective, you want to bring the whole team in and make sure they understand the objective. Now, if you are doing this on behalf of another company or you're doing this on behalf of a client, and you know what you need to achieve, it's the SWOT analysis is maybe what's the best way to go about doing it. If it's a product that you were trying to build or do, then your SWOT analysis is going to be about what is the value proposition of what you're building. So now you want to more understand who's going to use the product. So by definition and in theory, a SWOT analysis is to look at those different risks, and look at the strengths that are of some of your decisions. But you need to put this into perspective of your objectives and your goals. But yes, at times you do want to bring everybody together collectively, brainstorm, but set boundaries in that conversation. I've seen these brainstorming sessions go all over the place, and you don't actually achieve much other than somebody just coming really trying to convince people that their idea is better than everybody else's. You want to really bring a structure to what is it you're trying to do a SWOT analysis on. And if it's a value proposition, then you want to understand why the person you're doing this for would want it, what don't they want, and you start narrowing it down. And again, very much like these big projects where we brought them into epics, where we brought them into smaller tasks. You want to take that approach to even a SWOT analysis.
You wrote the military approach to worrying about true boredom was busy work. What are the negative consequences and what's the alternative?
You know, busy work is, people sometimes do this because they don't, they're not feeling part of the team, and then they'll take on things that really are not helping the team in any way. Uh, if you have a good backlog and you really have planned out your thoughts to the extent needed, there's nothing wrong with going and looking at that backlog of work and saying, all right, well, I know we haven't prioritized this right now, but let me go do this work. It's going to help us in the future. Rather do that than creating work that really is not benefiting the team. Help other team members out. Now, it's very often a team member will say, well, you don't understand this or you don't know this, so I'm going to have to do it. Well, that doesn't help the team learn, like we just said. So, let the team members say, well, let me go try do this for you. But try always keep it with the same objective and intent that the team, sets out to accomplish a certain number of tasks within a certain period. And let's say the cadence is 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, I'm going to start off and say, I'm going to do these 30 items. And as the team evolves, you're all participating in accomplishing that. You then won't be distracted like you could be if you just left to your own efforts or intents where you really don't have a full purpose.
We all know it's rare that project goals totally go smooth. How do you prepare for the potential problems? And is preparing more a mental mindset?
It is. I look at sometimes failures as opportunities. I don't look at a failure as a failure. Someone ever said to me, "Have you ever failed?" And I say, "Yeah." I said, "Well, it depends in whose perspective of it that are you asking? Because what I've done with my own failures is, due to reflection, I have changed my course of action and ultimately then done something else. So I was fortunate enough, I've started 11 companies. Some of those companies didn't succeed the way I had intended, but some of the byproducts that I've taken from those companies evolved into other companies, and they were very successful. I would never have done that had I never started with my first intention. I don't consider that a failure. I consider that something that's just evolved and changed. And I think people don't think like that. They take it upon themselves. Well, they failed now, and the world's come to an end. And it's not. You talked about preparing for that mental mindset. Look at these things as different ways of learning, different ways of estimating things, how to adapt and do things in this much shorter iterative way. And that will also minimize your failures. And then even if you do have a failure, what's the worst? You failed over a 2-week initiative. So you go back and you retool, and you then have a successful 2 weeks thereafter. So I think it is a mindset, you're correct. And there are ways to do it by really treating them as actually the glass is half full, not half empty.
By the way, I didn't know much about Murphy's Law. I mean, we all know Murphy's Law, but it wasn't until I read your book that I realized that I learned it was a captain who was an engineer in the Air Force, and everybody would quote Murphy's Law from that. I thought that there were so many cool things you learned from your book. One of the things you put in the book is, what did General President Eisenhower mean by plans are useless, but planning is indispensable?
And this is what we've been speaking about for the last 40 some minutes, 50 minutes, is it's that balance. It's that Eisenhower, if you read the history books, they say he was very, very detailed. He wanted to articulate everything. He wanted to write everything down. But he also understood that the more he tried to plan, the more things would change anyway. And he realized that, to win the wars that he fought, he had to adapt. even as detailed as he was. And really what I believe is meant by that saying that, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. It's really trying to get that correct balance. And it speaks volumes. It speaks for itself, because it's not perfect science to overplan, underplan, but it's finding that balance.
It's funny, you always read winners, whether it's history, business, sports, are adaptable, that they change and take a look at the current situation, and their thinking evolves and they make changes as they go along. And the ones who didn't win, you always read after that they didn't make adjustments in their game plan, how they were the battle or the company itself, and they eventually sunk themselves by not being adaptable and the willingness to change. And you talk about that throughout the book. We all know it's rare that a project goes totally smooth. How do you prepare for potential problems and preparing that mental mindset for it?
It's really practicing everything that we've just said. It's building confidence to know that you can get out of any situation. So it is thinking through what those different possibilities are. We use the word people get lucky. Yeah, I don't believe in that. It's being in the right place at the right time and being prepared to be able to take advantage of an opportunity that's given to you. That's not lucky. You prepared yourself for that opportunity. So it's really preparation. It's looking at all the tools that you have available to yourself, practicing, uh, keeping in shape, just like you do in a gym, uh, and really being available when those times come to take advantage of what you've been asked of. We see this in the tennis. I don't know if you watched Wimbledon,
Oh, I
how
do.
some of those players
Yeah.
adapted and how they changed. Now they prepared for that. There was preparation in giving them that ability to change.
You write about the importance of reflecting, and you talked about this earlier as you're going through a project. Why is this important, and how do you accomplish this in a constructive way?
Well, I think people really need to realize reflection is not a post-mortem. It's not about finding fault. It's about looking at what you're doing right. So there's a very much a positive spin on it, and that's why the word reflection is used and not other words. And you should do this regularly. This will keep you all in alignment, and it will keep you on course. It's very, very important, and it should be regular. Just as you plan every week, you should reflect on how your plans worked for that week.
What are the best practices for communicating with clients and other stakeholders, especially conducting review cycles?
Keep the meeting on track. Don't go all over the place. Also, make sure you're doing this on a regular cadence. Don't only meet when you feel it's important to meet. Meet on a regular basis. Set your schedule up. If it's a 1-year project, set up a scheduled meeting to meet with your stakeholders every 2 weeks. Go in there with a planned structure. Only talk about what's needed, what was done, what's going to get done, how that works into the whole project, and build that discipline. And that will help you be very effective with them.
You write, waiting for a complete results is not always the most productive course. What do you mean by this?
Well, sometimes people have a trait that if they can find a reason not to do something, they will. And you want to keep always active. You want to keep working. I have the saying, if you get dropped in the middle of the ocean, which direction are you going to swim?
Yeah.
People will come up with crazy answers, or they'll say, well, let me wait for the weather, let me look at this, let me look at that. And there's no right or wrong answer, by the way, but my answer is just swim. It's not relevant the direction you're going in. My attitude is, if you don't swim, you'll drown. So you really want to keep swimming, and then you want to reflect and make sure you're going in the right direction. So don't wait, get started.
It's funny you should say. At one time, I was CEO of a company, and it wasn't going well. And I was 31 years old. And I said to the board, here's our different options. And one of the board members said, options? You're the CEO. you should be telling us where we're going, not telling us the options. And so one of the board members who ran a Fortune 500 came to me and said, let's have lunch. And when we had lunch, he said to me, you know, Mark, when you're lost, you just keep walking in a direction and you keep reflecting on what's happening, and then you make course corrections. So, or else everybody goes into a panic. So he said, you don't ask everybody, oh, what should we do? You start to think it through and then go in a certain direction. And I thought that was always invaluable advice that he gave me. How do you manage emotions in a high stress project and not let them negatively impact the project?
You know, you want to hopefully practice some of the tips in the book, but it's about confidence. You want to be confident and grow and mature. Tuckman,
Is it turn now or not yet?
Tuckman has a theory that talks about us maturing in how we go about doing things. And, you know, they say you got to start with forming. This is starting to learn how to work with each other. Then storming is when you start becoming a little bit more productive in how you go about things. Norming is the third stage where you really start doing things repetitively and you start building out a cadence of understanding. And then you ultimately get to performing, where you reach your ultimate goal of productivity. And that brings confidence. And if you're confident about something, it's irrelevant the predicament you're in, because you'll always get yourself out of it, and you will. And it's that you got to get that confidence. But it does take time to mature, and it means practicing the things that you're trying to do.
Kevin, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you spending the hour with us. And I know that from doing 11 ventures, and essentially every one of your projects is a new venture, nobody's learned those lessons better than you have. And probably nobody's been better at it at telling their own people how to handle these kinds of situations. Well, I thank you so much. I hope that maybe you might take the time to do a second book, because there was a lot of good stuff in this book, and I much appreciate you sharing this with us.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, allowing me to share some of my thoughts with your audience. It's been a great experience, great questions. Thank you. And, you know, and I'd like to just end it with get the job done. You know, that's what we measured on. That's what people want from people. You know, many people talk about doing something. They talk about how they're going to do it. You know, I'm proud of the fact that while people are talking about something, I've already done it. And that's if I can bring anything of value here today to anybody, it's really focus on getting the job done.
Thank you so much. Couldn't have been better said. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Bye-bye.